Hello, my friend. There is something miraculous happening inside you every day, every hour, even right now, whether you're aware of it or not. It is the ability of the nervous system to change, what we call neuroplasticity. This isn't a term reserved for scientists or neuroscientists. It is a vital mechanism, a fundamental biological trait gifted to humans so that we may adapt, learn, heal, and grow. And most importantly, it belongs to you. From the moment you were born, your brain wasn't a finished system. On the contrary, it was an open blueprint ready to be completed through experience. You didn't come into this world as a fully formed individual. You arrived like an untouched field, awaiting its seasons of planting. From the very first gestures, the first sounds, the first gaze upon you, the brain began doing its most extraordinary task, changing to adapt. The newborn brain is wired in a rudimentary way. The neural pathways are unordered. A baby cannot walk, cannot speak, cannot control limbs or express needs through language. Every function is waiting to be shaped, and they are shaped precisely through every moment you live, from the tiniest actions like grasping, hearing a familiar voice, to the earliest social interactions. That chain of experiences, repeated over time, crafts a brain that bears the distinct mark of you, unique and unlike any other. Science has shown that certain areas of the brain are particularly prone to change, such as the regions of vision, hearing, smell, and touch. These centers represent your sensory interface with the external world. Your brain constantly creates maps of your senses to capture how you interact with life. However, not all parts of the nervous system are this flexible. Some systems, like those regulating heart rate, breathing, and digestion, are nearly immutable. They're pre-programmed to maintain stable life functions, undisturbed by the ever-shifting external environment. What's striking is that during the early years of life, when the brain is in its most hungry to learn state, we absorb with almost no conscious effort. Children can pick up language, behaviors, and emotional cues without trying. But this doesn't last forever. After the age of 25, the brain no longer changes as effortlessly. Neural connections become stable, information superhighways are firmly established, and your brain is less inclined to form new paths. However, that doesn't mean your brain is locked. It simply means it requires more specific conditions to reopen the door to change. And this brings an important message. You can still learn, still evolve, still grow at any age if you know how to activate the nervous system correctly. This is not a comforting slogan. It is a conclusion of countless rigorous studies on neuroplasticity. So if you've ever thought, I'm too old to start over, it's too late to learn something new, or that's just who I am, then this is the moment to rewrite those limiting beliefs. Because within you still lives a brain that can learn for life. And you are the one who can lead that learning deliberately, strategically, passionately, and purposefully. Neuroplasticity doesn't promise instant transformation, but it promises something far more equitable. That anyone with perseverance, with the right conditions, with an open mindset can reinvent themselves. No matter how many times you've failed, no matter the wounds or stubborn habits you carry, your brain is constantly willing to listen to a new signal, the signal to begin again. And when that signal is sent, not by someone else, but by you, the nervous system responds. Old pathways can be rewritten, old limitations can be replaced, and a new version of you, more awake, more resilient, more empowered, can emerge. You don't need to change the whole world. You only need to decide to change yourself, beginning with what you're thinking, how you learn, and what you choose to focus on every single day. That is where neuroplasticity reveals its greatest power, and that is also where your life can turn to an entirely new chapter. There is a common misconception that many people believe throughout their lives, without ever questioning it, that after a certain age, the brain can no longer change, that learning, creativity, and recovery only belong to the young, and that adulthood is merely a process of running on preset tracks. But modern neuroscience has decisively debunked that belief. The truth is, although After puberty, the production of new neurons in the brain no longer flourishes as before. The brain's ability to reorganize, reconnect, and rewire remains real and vibrant. It simply demands a higher level of consciousness and more refined conditions. Imagine the brain as a network of highways. The roads most frequently traveled become wider, smoother, and more accessible. But that doesn't mean you can't build new routes. It simply means that in order to do so, you'll need more than chance. You'll need a strong enough reason, deliberate effort, and an environment that supports you. That is what draws the line between passive and active change. And when you know how to create the right conditions both internally and externally, the nervous system will begin rebuilding itself day by day, connection by connection. One of the most vivid proofs of this capacity lies in research on people who are congenitally blind. When vision is no longer the primary tool to perceive the world, the brain does not leave the visual cortex unused. Instead, it repurposes that region for other functions like hearing or touch. People who are blind and read Braille with their fingers not only learn to touch, they can see the world through their hands. They can distinguish sounds, vibrations, and distances at levels that are nearly unattainable for those with sight. This is powerful evidence that the brain does not abide by the limits of circumstances. It redefines them to adapt and evolve. And what's even more astonishing is this ability isn't reserved for special cases or those with sensory impairments. It is an inherent trait of every human brain. It exists within you if only you are conscious enough to awaken it. Every time you experience something new, every time you approach a novel skill, every time you push yourself out of your comfort zone to think, act, and respond differently, that is when you are laying the foundation for rewiring your nervous system. However, that change is not as effortless as it was in childhood. In early life, everything happens almost automatically. Children absorb language, behavior, and skills without focused effort. At that stage, the brain is like soft soil. Whatever you plant grows easily. But in adulthood, the soil hardens. You can no longer plant carelessly, but must till, water, and tend with care. This is precisely why changing habits, mindsets, or skills as an adult requires a clear strategy, a supportive environment, and sustained commitment. You might think you're not good at something, but the truth is you simply haven't trained properly. You might believe, I'm just not that kind of person. But perhaps that's only the result of neural pathways that have never been developed. You don't need to become someone entirely different, but you absolutely can become a better version of yourself with a nervous system redesigned to serve your new goals. This ability to change by nature doesn't come from grand or miraculous shifts. It comes from small, consistent actions. From asking a new question, trying a new learning method, to maintaining even the simplest habit. A new neural connection won't form if you only think about change, but it will begin to form when you act, even just a few minutes a day, with focus and determination. And here is the most important point. Your capacity to change does not depend on age, circumstances, or natural talent. It depends on your willingness to create the conditions for change. When you take control of your environment, both internally and externally, the brain will begin to listen. When you plant the seed of learning, no matter how small or awkward, it will take root. And when you continue to nourish it through consistent action, inner commitment, and a belief that I can become different, that is when new neural pathways begin to form. You don't need to wait for a major event to change. You don't need to wait for a perfect day to start over, because the most wonderful truth is this: your brain is still waiting for one signal, the signal that you are ready to take control. And when that signal arrives, it will respond with something no one can stop: transformation. Change, whether in your mind, your behavior, or your life, never begins with action. It always begins with something quieter, subtler, but more powerful than anything else. That is awareness. Every journey of reinvention needs a starting point, and that point does not lie in what you do, but in what you see within yourself. Because you cannot change something you don't even know exists. You cannot overcome a limitation you've never identified, and you cannot reach a new capacity if you've never believed you could. We often live inside automatic responses. Emotions rise and fall like a stream without explanation. Habits play out repeatedly without us ever stopping to ask, why do I act this way? Do I truly want to be like this? These familiar reactions, whether it's anger, anxiety, procrastination, or insecurity, are the result of neural pathways that have been traveled thousands of times in the past. They operate like unconscious mechanisms, making us believe they are our personality or our true self, but in truth, they are merely learned responses, and they can also be unlearned if you are aware enough to recognize them. Andrew Huberman once shared a personal story, seemingly small, yet profoundly revealing, about how our brains react. During a course, a woman came up to him and said that his voice made her feel incredibly uncomfortable because it reminded her of a traumatic memory. The noteworthy part wasn't the negative emotion, but her awareness of it. Instead of avoiding or silently enduring it, she chose to speak it out loud. And something remarkable happened. When the negative emotion was brought into the light of awareness, it began to lose its power. Over time, she became less affected by his voice, and eventually they became friends. Her brain changed, not through some complex therapy, but through the courage to name a true emotion and face it with clarity. This reveals a critical truth. Awareness is the first signal that activates the nervous system to reset. When you begin to notice an emotion, a behavior, or an outdated mental pattern, your brain starts registering, this needs to be re-examined. It's no longer operating on autopilot. It has entered a state of conscious observation. And in that very moment, the old circuits gain the chance to be rewritten. You don't need a thorough understanding of neuroanatomy to do this. You just need to start with simple questions. Why did I react that way? When did this begin? Is it truly serving me? Do I have another option? When you can pause, even just for a moment, to not react impulsively, but to respond with awareness, you are interrupting the old neural circuit and opening the door to build a new one. Of course, this process doesn't come from a single moment of awakening. Awareness is not a flash of lightning that strikes once and disappears. It is a light that must be kept on every day, and you keep it on through attention by practicing self-observation, even in the most familiar of situations. When you're angry, you recognize that you're angry. When you procrastinate, you don't scold yourself. You gently acknowledge, what am I avoiding? Each time you do that, you are not just learning to regulate emotions. You are teaching your brain a new way to respond, one that is more effective, more conscious, and more intentional. Neuroplasticity doesn't demand that you be perfect. It only asks that you know where you are and genuinely want to move forward. Because only when you recognize that something within you no longer serves you, will you have the motivation to change. And that is when your nervous system, like a signal receiver, shifts its mode. It listens, it prepares. And if you keep the light of awareness on long enough, you will witness the miracle. The reactions that once felt inevitable begin to soften. The behaviors that once felt uncontrollable begin to slow down. And in that pause, you get to choose something else. A different path, a different action, a different version of yourself. So if you are on the path of personal growth, don't rush to seek out sophisticated techniques or magical formulas. Start with the simplest yet most powerful thing, awareness. Because when you can see yourself honestly, gently, and clearly, you've already taken a significant step forward on the journey of rewiring your brain and recreating your life with conscious intention. There is a saying you've probably heard so many times it's become accepted as truth. Every experience changes you. But is that really accurate? In the light of modern neuroscience, the answer is no. Not every experience is powerful enough to change your brain. Merely passing through a moment does not automatically make you a new person. And just because you listen to a lecture, read a book, or watch an inspirational video doesn't mean your neural pathways are instantly transformed. The truth is more subtle, but also far more powerful. Only experiences that are fully lived in deep, intentional focus, accompanied by specific biochemical responses in the brain, can trigger real change. In other words, selective attention is the key that unlocks neuroplasticity. When you give your full focus to something without distraction, without drifting, without multitasking, that is when you send your brain a clear signal. This matters. And only then will neurotransmitters like epinephrine and acetylcholine be released in the right place at the right time, opening the door for new neural connections to form or for old ones to be strengthened or rewritten. Powerful example of this comes from a classic neuroscience experiment. Researchers had adult participants engage in a sensory test where they placed their fingers on a rotating drum covered with tiny ridges spaced at delicate intervals. The task was to press a button whenever they detected the smallest change in ridge spacing. This required intense concentration because the differences were nearly imperceptible without focused attention. The result, over time, the participants' brains showed significant changes in the cortical areas responsible for touch, not because they simply touched the drum, but because they attended with purpose to each subtle sensation. They didn't just do, they experienced consciously. In contrast, the control group, who also touched the drum but were instructed to focus on the sound it made, showed no changes in the touch areas of the brain. Instead, their auditory cortex changed. This reveals a critical insight. Where you place your attention determines which part of the brain gets activated and altered. You can't expect to improve just by going through the motions. You can't hope to be healed by passively listening to a conversation. Change only happens when you are fully present, mentally, emotionally, and biologically. This is why many people read hundreds of self-help books yet remain unchanged. They skim the words, but never truly connect with the content. They listen to motivational talks, but their minds are busy with messages, notifications, and scattered thoughts. The truth is, it's not that you lack knowledge, it's that you lack deep attention. In a world flooded with endless distractions, focus has become a precious asset. It is no longer just a skill, it is a requirement for personal transformation. You can begin with something very small. When learning something new, shut down all distractions and give your full mind to just one thing. If you're listening to someone, listen as if nothing else matters. If you're practicing a skill, bring your entire presence into it. The quality of your attention will determine the quality of your change. You may feel restless, impatient, even uncomfortable. That's not failure. That's a sign you're touching an old boundary and preparing to move beyond it. Don't pull away when boredom sets in, because that's exactly when your nervous system is being challenged to rewrite a circuit. Focus is not innate, it is trained. And training begins with a willingness to face discomfort in the process of learning. Remember this, your brain doesn't change just because you've had an experience. It changes because you poured your full aliveness into that experience. 1 hour of deep learning outweighs 10 hours of distracted study. One honest conversation is worth more than 100 shallow tips. And one fully attentive moment can make a difference you carry for a lifetime. So from today, do something simple. When you learn, truly learn. When you listen, truly listen. When you live, truly be present. It is that presence repeated over time that becomes the new blueprint of your brain. And that is where real change begins. If focus is the door, then what is the key that opens it? What makes an experience deep enough to be remembered, strong enough to rewrite the very structure of your brain? The answer, both scientific and wondrous, lies in a powerful trio of biochemical agents quietly working inside you every day. Epinephrine, acetylcholine from the brainstem, and acetylcholine from the prefrontal cortex. These aren't just dry biological terms. They are the subtle rhythms of a system designed to learn, adapt, and regenerate if you know how to awaken it at the right moment. Let's begin with epinephrine, more commonly known as adrenaline. Every time you feel alert, focused, vigilant, or in a situation that demands immediate action, epinephrine is released. It raises your heart rate, dilates your pupils, and shifts your body into a state of fully alive. But more than just keeping you awake, epinephrine sends the brain an initial signal: be ready to learn. What's about to happen is important. It's a signal of positive arousal, not necessarily stress, but an awakened presence of the entire nervous system. However, epinephrine is only the starting point. To truly unlock deep learning and rewiring of the brain, you need a second agent, acetylcholine from the brainstem. If epinephrine is the alarm bell, acetylcholine is the spotlight operator. It creates a highlight in the constant stream of information, ensuring your brain doesn't get overloaded, but instead zeroes in on the most relevant signals. This is the mechanism that helps you filter noise to retain what matters and discard what doesn't. Without acetylcholine, your attention drifts, disperses, and lacks depth. But with it, you become like a magnifying glass, focusing your entire mental energy on a single, precise point. And for the process to truly leave a mark, for the experience to become not just a moment, but a memory, a skill, a part of who you are, you need a third element, acetylcholine from the prefrontal cortex, specifically the nucleus basalis. This is the mechanism that declares, this matters, this must be remembered. Without it, even if you have emotion and attention, the experience can still slip through your fingers like sand. But when this chemical is activated, that experience leaves an imprint, a neural signature, ready to be consolidated during sleep and repeated over time until it becomes a solid part of your new nervous system. These three agents, epinephrine, acetylcholine from the brainstem, and acetylcholine from the nucleus basalis, do not act separately. They are a synchronized trio, and they need to appear together at the right moment. And the incredible thing is, you can intentionally create the conditions to activate all three by setting up situations that heighten your alertness, by clearly defining what you want to learn, by choosing environments and times free of distraction, by connecting emotion with purpose, and above all, by living that moment as if nothing else matters. Imagine yourself sitting with a book, a notebook, or a meaningful project. When your heartbeat rises, your eyes fix on the words and your mind stops wandering. That's when epinephrine has kicked in. When you narrow your attention to a single passage, feel every word, and understand deeply instead of skimming, that's acetylcholine from the brainstem guiding your attention stream. And if in that moment you feel something inside you wants to remember, wants to master, wants to make it yours, then acetylcholine from the prefrontal cortex is also at work. You're not just learning, you're changing, you're rewriting yourself. This doesn't require you to be perfect. You don't need to wait for peak energy or an ideal flawless environment. You only need to understand that your body, when understood correctly, is always ready to be an ally on your journey of learning and growth. You don't have to fight yourself to change. You just need to learn how to work with your nervous system. It's the union of knowledge and willpower, of science and action. And when those three biochemical agents are awakened, transformation is no longer a distant idea. It becomes a natural process. So next time you truly want to learn something, or begin rewriting an old part of who you are, don't just think about the content, think about your state. Create the biological conditions for your brain to understand this is important. Because once your brain is activated in the right way, what you learn will not just be remembered, it will be relived, repeated, and become you. And that is the most solid foundation for real transformation. You now know that the brain can only change when three key biological elements are activated simultaneously. Epinephrine to awaken alertness, acetylcholine to concentrate attention, and to mark what must be remembered. But the next important question is this: how do you actively generate that state in real life? How do you access deep learning without waiting for a crisis, a shock, or a spontaneous burst of inspiration? The answer is not beyond your reach. It begins with how you ignite your emotional energy and personal intent before embarking on any journey of transformation. The human body is a sophisticated machine, but what makes it extraordinary is its ability to connect emotion and physiology. You don't need medication to increase epinephrine. You just need a goal that makes your heart beat faster. You don't need special equipment to focus. You just need to know why what you're about to do matters so deeply to you. Epinephrine, the chemical of alertness, isn't only produced by danger or pressure, it's also released by strong desire, sincere commitment, or even the fear of losing something precious. Indeed, the motivation to enter a high-focus state doesn't need to come from dramatic external events. It can arise from a quiet question. If I don't change, what will my life look like in 5 years? Or more simply, have I gone far enough with this old way of living? If such questions run deep enough, you'll feel your body begin to respond. Your heartbeat quickens, your breathing sharpens, and distraction starts to give way to seriousness. That's epinephrine being released, not by an emergency, but by a decision strong enough to make you no longer tolerate drifting through life. Some people use hacks to push themselves, telling others about their goals, making financial bets on the outcome, or even sending shameful letters to be exposed if they fail to follow through. These methods can be effective, not because they're magical, but because they create healthy tension, forcing you into a state of alertness and focus. Yet there are also those who rise not through pressure, but through love. A promise to someone they care about, a commitment to be a role model for their children, or simply a deep gratitude for life and the wish not to waste any more time. Wherever it comes from, love, fear, inspiration, or pressure, it all shares one thing in common. It wakes you up. And once you're awake, you no longer learn halfway. You no longer take in knowledge just to know, but to transform. That's when focus is no longer a luxury, but a necessity, like an arrow pulled tightly on a bow. You cannot help but release. You cannot return to indifference. Remember, focus states do not arrive by accident. They are created, and you can prepare for them, build them, and protect them as a ritual before each session of study, work, or personal growth. A strong cup of coffee, an instrumental track, a space free from interruptions, a slip of paper with the reason why you started, a whispered promise in your mind. These small details, repeated over time, become cues to the brain. It's time to focus. It's time to change. The more you train, the easier it becomes to enter that state. Your brain will learn to distinguish between ordinary time and sacred time, those periods you truly devote to upgrading yourself. It will become a biological rhythm of its own, a positive psychological framework that you can access almost automatically with the right trigger. Finally, if you find yourself struggling to focus or lacking motivation, don't blame yourself. It's not a personal flaw. It's simply a nervous system that hasn't yet been activated correctly. Pause. Ask yourself again, how badly do I want this? Write down 3 reasons why quitting is not an option. Visualize the outcome you desire and the cost of inaction. Then take a deep breath. Look at your starting point and begin again. Not perfectly, just sincerely, because you're not just learning something new. You are retraining the very mechanisms of focus and change within your nervous system. And every time you do that, you move closer to becoming a version of yourself no longer governed by old habits, but someone actively rewriting yourself from within. There is a subtle yet powerful truth that very few people realize. Mental focus is not merely a state of mind. It is a biologically activatable response. And the starting point of that response lies in the simplest of places, your eyes. When you know how to direct your gaze, you are also commanding your entire nervous system, shifting it from a scattered state to one of convergence, from distraction to clear presence. And that is the foundation upon which knowledge can imprint, skills can take root, and the brain can begin the process of rewiring itself intentionally. You can feel this in your everyday life. When you truly pay attention to someone speaking to you, your eyes naturally settle on them, more focused, deeper, and everything else around you seems to blur. In contrast, when your mind is distracted, your gaze also wanders, drifting from place to place without resting long enough anywhere. This is no coincidence. It's how the body and mind operate as one. Visual focus is the first bridge into cognitive focus. Logically speaking, every time you fix your gaze on a specific point, a paragraph, an image, a corner of your screen, the brain registers that zone as important information. Instantly, a cascade of biochemical responses is triggered. Your eyes constrict, pupils adjust, muscles around your forehead and temples engage more actively, and most importantly, levels of epinephrine and acetylcholine in the brain begin to rise. These are the foundational elements of neuroplasticity, meaning that simply by looking with intention, you are opening a gateway for learning and transformation. This explains why visual training is one of the most effective ways to lead the mind into deep focus. And you don't need complex tools to do this. All it takes is a small point. It could be a single word, a symbol, or even a blank space on your screen, and spending 60 to 120 seconds looking at it, doing nothing else. No wandering thoughts, no picking up your phone, no checking email, just maintaining your gaze. The simpler, the more powerful, because what you're doing isn't just looking, you are training your brain to focus on one thing only. Logically speaking, every time you fix your gaze on a specific point, a paragraph, an image, a corner of your screen, the brain registers that zone as important information. Instantly, a cascade of biochemical responses is triggered. Your eyes constrict, pupils adjust, muscles around your forehead and temples engage more actively, and most importantly, levels of epinephrine and acetylcholine in the brain begin to rise. These are the foundational elements of neuroplasticity, meaning that simply by looking with intention, you are opening a gateway for learning and transformation. This explains why visual training is one of the most effective ways to lead the mind into deep focus. And you don't need complex tools to do this. All it takes is a small point. It could be a single word, a symbol, or even a blank space on your screen, and spending 60 to 120 seconds looking at it, doing nothing else. No wandering thoughts, no picking up your phone, no checking email, just maintaining your gaze. The simpler, the more powerful, because what you're doing isn't just looking, you are training your brain to focus on one thing only. Remember, focus is not a divine gift reserved for the few. It is a skill, and like any other skill, it can be trained. And your eyes, like the first lever, can help you enter that state whenever you choose. You don't need to wait for inspiration. You don't need to wait for the perfect environment. You only need to guide your gaze to the right point and hold it there with full presence. When you practice this every day, even for just a few minutes, you'll begin to notice an email gets written faster, a passage from a book stays with you longer, a conversation becomes deeper, and most importantly, you'll realize it's not because you suddenly became more talented, but because you've learned how to steer your mind with empowered intent. And when you can do that, when you can begin every learning or working session with a minute of deep looking and full presence, you're not just training focus, you're laying the solid foundation for a nervous system that listens, that learns, and that is ready to transform anything you place your wholehearted belief into. Science can give you the formula. Knowledge can lay out the roadmap, but unless you bring all of it into real life, change will forever remain a dormant possibility yet to be awakened. Neuroplasticity, the miraculous capacity of the brain to rewire itself, does not live in theory. It lives in the smallest choices, the repeated behaviors of each day. And the gateway into deep learning rarely begins with grand events. It usually starts with the most ordinary habit. One of the first essential practices is learning how to intentionally guide your visual focus when starting any task that requires concentration. As we've explored, the mind follows the eyes. So if you often feel distracted, impatient, or adrift in endless thoughts, don't be quick to blame yourself for being weak. Start instead by retraining your gaze. For reading, writing, studying, or engaging in any mentally demanding work, spend 1 or 2 minutes simply staring at a small, fixed point. A simple symbol, a quiet corner of your screen, or a spot on the wall in front of you. Don't think, don't try to do anything else, just look. And hold your gaze there as a ritual to initiate a focused state. This not only helps stabilize your nervous rhythm, but also creates a preconscious buffer where your brain prepares to receive information in a more selective and effective way. Once you begin, you'll notice that focus is not a straight line. It fluctuates. Sometimes it's razor sharp. Other times it blurs. And it's precisely in those moments when your attention drifts and you pull it back that the real training is happening. The return is the core exercise, not perfection. Don't scold yourself when your mind wanders. Instead, treat every return of attention as one more rep for your neural muscle. Just like in athletics, it's the repetitive motion that builds lasting strength, not a single rare burst of intensity. Beyond vision, you can also use hearing to practice presence, especially when working with sound or learning through listening. A simple yet highly effective method is to close your eyes while listening. Closing your eyes reduces visual noise and creates a single channel attention stream, allowing you to truly connect with the content. Many people find this odd because they're used to living in multitasking mode, but this simplicity and separation are exactly what the brain needs to shift into deep absorption. Interestingly, in moments when you feel discomfort, restlessness, or a desire to give up, it's not necessarily failure. On the contrary, it's a sign that biological activation is working as intended. Epinephrine, the alertness chemical, makes you feel slightly tense, sometimes agitated. But if you understand that this feeling isn't wrong, you won't rush to escape it. You'll learn to stay in that state. Regulate your breath, hold your gaze, and move through it. And when you can do that long enough, you won't just complete a task, you'll expand your capacity to focus for the next time. Remember, all deep focus must be protected. This means staying away from distractions, turning off notifications, placing your phone out of reach, choosing a quiet space, and blocking out uninterrupted time. This isn't rigidity, it's kindness to yourself. You cannot expect your brain to operate effectively when every 3 minutes a ping drags you out of your thought stream. Focus needs a clean space, not just in your surroundings, but in your mind. Finally, don't forget, neuroplasticity does not happen while you're learning. It happens afterward. It's during rest, especially during deep sleep or NSDR, non-sleep deep rest, that new neural connections are consolidated, and what you've just learned actually becomes part of you. That's why after each deep study session, don't rush into the next task. Take 10 to 20 minutes to close your eyes, breathe evenly, and let go of effort, just to give your brain the space to organize what it has taken in. This is how you bring neuroscience into real life. No complex tools, no perfect environments, just small actions repeated with mindfulness. A gaze held a little longer, a minute of deeper listening, a conscious choice to protect your focus space. And every time you do that, you're not just learning something new, you're rebuilding your nervous system. A nervous system that knows how to filter what matters, how to defend your presence, and how to create change from the smallest of actions. In a world that glorifies busyness, many people believe that the more they do, the longer they sit, and the harder they strain their minds, the better the results. But neuroscience tells a different story. The brain is not designed to sustain deep work for hours on end. In fact, you can achieve much higher performance if you learn to respect a biological rhythm that already exists within your body, the Ultradian rhythm, a cycle of approximately 90 minutes that governs how your brain and body manage attention, energy, and focus throughout the day. And when you align with this rhythm instead of fighting it, you won't just work more effectively, you'll feel less drained and maintain long-term clarity. An ultradian cycle consists of roughly 90 minutes during which you can enter a state of deep focus if you've prepared the biological conditions and environment as outlined in previous sections. But not all 90 minutes are created equal. Within that span, usually only the middle 60 minutes are the brain's peak zone of attention, where neural connections are firing at their highest capacity to memorize, analyze, and integrate information. The beginning and end of the cycle are times when attention is warming up and then gradually tapering off from deep focus. That's why you don't need to force yourself to stay hyper-focused for the full 90 minutes. You just need to remain within the learning zone long enough for your brain to drop into its deepest level of cognitive performance. You'll know you've entered the golden hour of focus when you lose track of time, your mind stops drifting, and whatever you're doing flows almost effortlessly. But don't expect that to happen in the first few minutes. Just as the body needs a warm-up before intense exercise, the brain also needs time to regulate neurotransmitters, organize attention streams, and quiet mental noise. Don't give up simply because the first 10 minutes feel unproductive. Allow yourself to warm up your mind, and you'll notice the shift in the later phase of the cycle. When the ultradian cycle ends, what's equally important is that you rest with intention. Rest does not mean picking up your phone to scroll social media. That only drowns your brain in a new wave of stimuli, robbing the nervous system of time to regenerate. True rest means doing nothing. You can close your eyes, take a slow walk, breathe deeply, gaze out the window, or practice a simple technique called NSDR, non-sleep rest. These are moments of neural silence when the connections just activated during deep focus are consolidated, stabilized, and cleaned up. A deep rest period of just 15-20 minutes after learning can significantly increase memory retention and integration, more so than even a full night of sleep without prior preparation. And if you can't rest right after deep work, don't worry. The marking mechanism of acetylcholine still leaves biological scars in your brain, places where synapses have been tagged for memory. Whether you rest later in the day or during sleep that night, those traces will still be processed during deep sleep. But if you want to accelerate your progress, if you want to feel noticeable improvement day by day, then strategically alternating study and rest is the most powerful lever you can actively choose. Of course, there will be days when you can only manage one cycle. Other days, maybe 2 or even 3. There is no magic number. What matters is that you don't treat focus as a heavy obligation, but as a ritual, a sacred window of time devoted to your personal growth. In that window, you unplug from the world, return to yourself, look deeply into what you're learning, and know that you're not just completing a task, you're building a new version of yourself, slowly but surely. And when you finish a cycle of deep work, don't rush into the next task. Create a pause, even just 5 or 10 minutes, to thank yourself for showing up fully. Maybe you didn't finish everything or hit a big milestone, but you just planted a seed. And in the world of neuroscience, a single seed of focus can grow into a forest of potential if you nourish it with deep rest and small, consistent effort every single day. You've walked with me quite a long way, where we gradually peeled back the layers of the brain, examined seemingly mysterious mechanisms, and explored mental states that can be trained through your eyes, breath, and focused attention. But in the end, the most important shift doesn't happen when you're trying. It happens when you let go, when you allow your body to return to stillness. When you stop running and surrender yourself to deep silence, that is when the brain truly begins the process of transformation. Many people still believe that learning happens only while they are listening, taking notes, or straining to understand. But neuroscience shows us that the connections activated during learning are merely the beginning. Real change, where new synapses are strengthened, signals are repeated and stored, takes place during deep sleep. It is the phase when all the attention you've given to something during the day is reviewed by the brain. And if deemed important enough, it will begin etching itself into your neural architecture. So if you've learned how to focus, you also need to learn how to rest with intention, because rest isn't simply stopping, it's part of the learning process. And sleep isn't the end of your waking day, it is an extension of your effort. If you've spent 90 minutes focused on something meaningful, then going to bed on time, turning off all lights, and letting yourself fall into deep sleep is the next step in turning that experience into a part of who you are. But what if you don't sleep well one night? If you're restless, interrupted, or anxious? Don't worry. The body has a way to compensate. You can turn to a simple yet powerful solution that scientists call NSD, non-sleep deep rest. This could be 15-20 minutes in the afternoon where you lie down, close your eyes, and make no effort to think, just allowing your nervous system to rinse off the debris of the day and quietly do its magic, reinforcing the valuable insights you've absorbed. You don't need to try to remember. You only need to trust and give your brain the silent space to finish the job it was designed for. The more you understand rest, the more you'll realize performance doesn't come from doing more. It comes from doing in rhythm. Deep focus, deep rest, purposeful learning, quality sleep, and each such cycle repeated long enough will rewrite the way you think, work, and show up in life. Now that we've reached this point, I don't want to leave you with just knowledge. I want you to carry with you a clear feeling that you absolutely can change yourself from the inside out. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need special conditions. You just need one repeated choice each day. Set aside time to be fully present, to learn, and then to rest with reverence. You're not in a race with anyone. You don't need to force yourself to become someone else overnight. You just need to walk alongside yourself with patience and kindness. And if there's one final thing I'd like to say, it's this. You're not losing just because you've procrastinated, lost focus, forgotten what you studied or tried and failed before. You only fail if you allow those moments to repeat without choosing something different. But if today, just this time, you decide to do it differently, to hold your gaze before learning, to silence all distractions, to study for 90 minutes and rest in stillness, to sleep early so your brain can integrate something meaningful, then you've already stepped into a new rhythm for your life. So start today. Don't wait for Monday. Don't wait for motivation to swell. Just choose one small action and do it with full presence. Then do it again tomorrow and the day after. And one day you'll realize you no longer need to try to change because you've already become someone else. I wish you enough courage to begin again, enough clarity to slow down, enough discipline to carve out quality time in a distracted world, and enough faith to know that your brain is always ready to serve the better version of you if you dare to send it the signal that now is the time. Now put your phone down, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and begin your transformation. You're ready now.